I would love to lay this foundation and talk about liver health, because when we're talking gut health, it's so important to understand kind of what's going on inside the body.
The Chinese call it, for lack of better terms, liver heat. And by liver heat, you've got inflammation in the liver. And so what happens is milk thistle and dandelion are liver coolers. The reason why they're liver coolers is because they help the liver detoxify and move its substances through.
If I am drastically removing, deleting, eliminating a micro or macronutrient in the diet, like that's not balanced for the body. That's not what the body wants.
You go on a meat diet, it's going to change your microbiome. I'm telling you right now. You go on a vegan diet, it's going to change it. I'm not telling you it's going to be positive or negative one way or the other. I'm just going to tell you it's going to change it.
Welcome back to another episode of Wellness for Life. I'm your host, Niki Wolf, and today we have a very special guest in the building, somebody who's just barely touched the surface of working in the health industry. Total jokes aside. Starkie Sowers is the director of education at Clark's Nutrition. He's been there for roughly 43 years. I think there's no better way to kind of explain how you got into this industry and what you've been up to. Starkie, if you kind of want to throw out that foundation of how you got here.
Yeah, no, it's really pretty insane if you think about it. Like when I was a kid, my dad came home, I think I was 10 or something like that, and he started throwing away all the sugar stuff in the house. And we're like, oh my God, what are you doing? Here goes our Lucky Charms and everything goes in the trash. And it was like monumental, right? You got his like Cheerios and Kicks, which was about the healthiest thing you could get in those days, right? And then we had brown sugar and Cheerios. Imagine that, right? And so we started honey and all this crazy stuff. And he was working a full-time job and he decided he was going to, do some multi-level company and sell vitamins door to door, right? So that lasted for I don't know how long. And then he eventually went and started a gym because he was always working out and stuff like that. So we had a gym by the time I was 10 years old. And I kind of started helping him and just, taking out trash on the weekends, stuff like that. By the time I was like 14, 15 years old, I was working full-time after schools in the gym as well. I was 15. I couldn't even drive yet. I was managing on the weekends, right? So anyways, nutso stuff. But for lunch and for breakfast, anytime we were hungry, we went to Clark's Nutrition down the street to get our stuff, right? And so lo and behold, my dad sells the gym when I was 18. I'm like, what do I do? And I was in a GNC and guy asked me, if I wanted to work there. So I started working there, worked there for about 2 years. But I was always going to Clark's because that was the home base, And so somewhere along the line, I just got sick and tired of the whole corporate thing. And I thought, I'm just going to go back to school, biomed, and then I'm just going to do my deal and like just work in a health food store, right? So I applied there, and next thing I know, 43 years later, I've done just about everything from, empty the trash all the way up to now, director of education and work with other different upper management stuff. So yeah, it's crazy. And been in the industry forever. It's just been a blast for sure. No question about it. So. Oh,
that's awesome. Well, yeah, it sounds like you've been embedded into this industry from a very early age. You've learned these principles. I wonder what your dad, did he come across, you say multi-level marketing, but I wonder if it was like a video or something that like really like got that inspiration in him to like, all right, we're making a change.
Yeah, no, so he kind of always kind of had this little health message going on. And so it was kind of intermittent throughout our years. So as a kid growing up, we had weights around the house. We had all sorts of different stuff. And, he always worked out at the gym and things of that nature. So for us, it was like part of everyday life, And so ultimately the weights and like I showed you my garage gym here. It's like all crazy and stuff like that. And it's like I get anxiety if I don't go to the gym. It's like, so, but ultimately he kind of laid that foundation. He would be kind of on and off on the health thing. He would be like into the health thing and take the vitamins and stuff like that, which was great. And then he would clean his diet up, and then every now and then he would stray away, so it was kind of back and forth a little bit. And me and my brother kind of bit into it. And we're like, okay, we're just doing this for life,
Yep.
Used to cut school, go down to Gold's Gym, Venice Beach, stuff. It's funny, back when I was a teenager, you could cut school and write your own note to get out of class.
Yeah.
Hey, it's time to go to Gold's Gym. So we would like,
oh my gosh,
Gold's Gym, we're gone by,
Yep.
So,
did you live over in the like LA area?
I lived in Riverside. So we're like 60 miles, inland,
yeah.
But for us, it was like, it's an hour drive down to Venice Beach. So what do we care, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
They work out, stuff like that. So a lot of
Oh, that's so funny.
getting education about nutrition was insane. But I literally almost failed my way through high school. And so then as I was working at GNC, I thought I better go to college. So I started going to college, and all of a sudden I found biochemistry, which, I took nothing but, advanced wind chills when I was a kid, donut shop or whatever. I don't know, and so bottom line was I started getting into it and got into the whole chemistry and biochemistry. I was like, oh my God, here's the answers I've been looking for. Nutrition for so long. It's like right here. And so next thing you know, I'm on the dean's list, right? And I'm like going, I have no business being on the dean's list. But anyways, bottom line is that the passion for nutrition back in the late 70s or 80s was still hard to find. I took a nutrition class, and the lady that taught the nutrition class, the final was you had to go to McDonald's and eat the 4 food groups for 3 days in a row. That was
gosh.
The midterm is you had to go to Clark's Nutrition and find a book about quackery. Okay? So anyways, all I did in her class is, the chemistry stuff I wrote down, yeah, true, yes, or whatever, answered the questions on the test. But when it came to her personal beliefs, if anything I believe was true, I just put false, and then I was good because she didn't believe in it, right?
Yeah.
Like taking herbs are good for your health. True. No, false. She was adamant against herbs, adamant against this, adamant against all these different things. And then I started going down the biochem pathway and going into all the biology and different classes like that, and started meeting up with guys that worked with Dr. Linus Pauling. Dr. Linus Pauling, 48 Degrees, Linus Pauling Institute of Medicine, did more research on vitamin C nutrition than anybody, right? So I started finding these guys, and they're like, no, dude, don't listen to her. She's so archaic. It's unbelievable. The wave that's coming is going to be unbelievable, and we're actually seeing it today.
Yeah. I think it's like you did it perfectly. Like, know your audience, know what you need to say. And not that we're condoning this behavior, but I think now in this day and age, you got to know your audience and kind of what they want to hear. But with all that aside, talking about chemistry, because it's funny, like I've always been into health since a very early age. And I guess I never connected the two. I geeked out on chemistry. That wasn't my degree, but I did AP Chem in high school and I loved it in college. So I guess those two together make sense. But speaking of your kind of science passion and background, I would love to lay this foundation and talk about liver health, because when we're talking gut health, it's so important to understand kind of what's going on inside the body. The liver, there's so many different, I think it can be like overcomplicated. And I've just heard from a number of people, shout out to Meg Thurlow, that you lay out liver health in such an easy way to understand. But before we go into, because today I'd love to explore 2 of our formulas, purity and digestivity, I think it's important to understand what liver health is.
Yeah. So, one of my favorite formulas is the purity formula. And so, it's very well put together. A couple little bullet points on it for you, just so you can have a heads up. Not like you don't know. So milk thistle, some resveratrol, some artichoke, some turmeric, some N-acetylcysteine, things of that nature. What we'll do is we'll kind of explore how these herbs work and how they work in the system. But I think it's really fun to just think of like, let's think of like liver health. Okay. I'm going to present you 2 photos of liver. Okay. So here's the first one. Meal, whatever you're doing, you drink or whatever you're eating goes into the system, goes into the digestive system. So the digestive system, you've been talking about the digestive system, the biome and everything of that nature, how it's got this bacteria balance and things of that nature. So food has bacteria too, by the way. So if you don't cook it properly, if you're eating raw foods, it gets in the system and it has good and bad bacteria. Okay. And so most of it's good and things of that nature. But ultimately what happens is the body's got to filter that out. So it goes to the digestive system, hydrochloric acid kicks in, and then the bacteria it basically kills bad bacteria that's been ingested. Then all of a sudden these nutrients get absorbed. 90% of these nutrients head up to what is known as the portal vein and goes right to the liver. So let's say you miss some bacteria.
Okay, when you say miss.
So let's say there's some bacteria out of the digestive system and then you've got like maybe fungal things or whatever else that you ate. All of a sudden it's now in the liver, and the liver has to deal with this and like eliminate it. So I'm going to give you, so from the inception of that, number 1, there's one way that we can get actually toxins into the body. Okay. Number 2 is every time we breathe. You live in Southern California. I live in Southern California. My professors used to tell me, living in Southern California, you don't take another 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day, you're a nut because of all the pollutants that you're actually ingesting. And we'll get into that. So those pollutants, we've got air particles, different things like that. Every year, there's like 100 new man-made chemicals being poured into the environment. We call those xenobiotics, which basically we don't know what they are. They're just basically garbage stuff that gets infiltrated out to us. And this ends in, and we end up ingesting it and or breathing it or having it come into our system via different avenues, right? So ultimately what happens is now all of a sudden, guess where those toxins are going to go? They've got to go and filter through the liver. Then you've got the dailies every single day of just normal cellular management, and that's got to be filtered through. So every time our heart pumps, it literally pumps out a truckload of blood. 25% of that blood hits the liver and goes through to get circulated to be cleaned and then put back out into the system. So between the kidneys and the liver, that's the purification organs. So now let's look at that. When we think of the liver, this is it does 600 different functions. It helps with metabolism of acids, it helps build certain types of proteins that carry things around the body. I mean, the liver is like extensive in what it does. We're just kind of hitting in on this moment of detoxification because ultimately what happens is as life goes on, especially as you get older, detoxification becomes less efficient. Okay. Did you drink coffee this morning?
I have some right here.
Yeah. Just talk about coffee. Coffee's fun, right? I can't drink coffee. We'll talk about why I can't drink coffee.
Okay.
Caffeine. All right. Caffeine, by the way, is the number one antioxidant consumed in the world. Most people don't know that, and caffeine's a great substance. Actually, I could sit here and talk to you about extensive research about caffeine probably for 3 hours, but I'm not going to do that. But the thing is certain people actually metabolize caffeine very efficiently, and then there's others like myself that takes 30 hours to clear caffeine.
And is that like a mutation of a gene?
Mutation of a gene in the liver. And guess who has it? Thank you very much. I can't do caffeine. If I do caffeine, I stammer and kick. Ask my wife. I've literally kicked my wife out of bed, just off the bed, boom, fell on the floor.
Wait, what's that mutation called?
So I don't know the exact name of it. I forget the gene FR124 or something like that.
Okay.
So, particular gene. And if you don't metabolize caffeine properly, you're one of those individuals that just is always hyper and can't handle the caffeine rush and things of that nature, right? And so here we are, we're back at the liver, and the liver is that detoxification point for caffeine and different substances, alcohol, different things that we eat or drink have to be filtered through the liver to be eliminated properly through the system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you got exogenous toxins such as air quality, pollutants, man-made chemicals, as well as like some different types of foods and things that you have. Then you also have endogenous toxins where the cells produce toxins and they have to be eliminated as well too. So let me give you an idea on that. For instance, if you take estrogen, if it doesn't break down properly, what happens is it ends up becoming a toxic type of estrogen that can cause, it's related to breast cancer, right? Mm-hmm. So is if we're not in a situation where estrogens are being metabolized properly, then we're going to build up the wrong type of estrogens and it's going to be a pro-cancer agent. So where does that happen? It happens in the liver. To a small degree, it does happen in the small intestine as well. And to a small degree, it also happens in the kidneys as well, some of this detoxification process. But ultimately, we end up with, and as I was saying, the bad estrogens, the beta estradiol, those are the enemies that get out there and really cause havoc. Same thing with when it comes to male testosterone. If it isn't properly broken down, males will build up estrogen as well too. So there's all these phases that happen in the body to get rid of all your garbage, and a large percentage of it is in the liver.
Yeah, that makes me even think, because I have the MTHFR mutation. Yeah. And I remember before I even knew the science, my naturopath would say, you have difficulty with liver detoxification. You should probably detox much more often. And, if you're taking, for those of you listening, if you're just taking regular B12 cyanocobalamin, your body is not properly methylating it and it becomes toxic in the system. And so that's why, so many of us talk about methylated B vitamins are so important. And 50% of the population has a mutation in their MTHFR gene. So
when I first started in the whole industry years ago, one of the things I noticed was this. When I was like 12 or 13 years old, my dad had a multivitamin around the house. And I would take a multivitamin. I felt better. So guess who has the MFTF, our gene as well? Myself. Yeah. DNA test back in 2000. And I have multiple defects in nutrient-oriented types of DNA. So, for instance, I have my vitamin D receptors. I have a mutation from mom and dad. My vitamin D needs are probably 5 times greater than anybody else. Okay. Wow. So then when it comes to the B vitamins, all I knew as a teenager, as an athlete, when I was working out, bodybuilding, stuff like that, when I took B vitamins, I felt calm and I felt good. And so you know the difference that 30%. So you talked about 50% have the, have the 5F2MR gene defect. But ultimately what happens is this. There's also probably another 30% that have other defects for B12, as also B2. There's other different deficiencies that you can have as well. Yeah. And so, yes, there's a huge amount. And by the way, the methylated, B12s and the methylfolates are going to be a lot more efficient for people. We didn't have those back in the day. So the body had to do the methylation. By the way, where does the methylation take place?
In the liver.
There you go.
Yeah, your liver, you got it. And that's even outside of, I'm sober, I don't drink, and I've never really been a drinker, but you start adding on all those other things, and to your point of we live in Southern California, every day we're breathing in all this stuff. And so no matter how hyper conscious we are of removing the plastics and removing all this stuff, there's so much. And that's, I guess, epigenetics of you have your genetic makeup and then all the other factors that influence that. And so we have to be conscious of everything we're putting in our body. And ultimately, if you don't know your MTHFR mutation, just have methylated B vitamins.
Ultimately, it would be best to have methylated. And so, for instance, when you look at your multivitamins, the Dr. Brendan's and stuff, it's already taken care of in your multis. So what a that you guys present with the LifeSeasons one has already been done for you. The proper dosages of B12 and things of that nature. So remember too, that's kind of an interesting moment. So we're talking about B12, very, very liver oriented, as well as the folate. Methylation also happens with choline and methionine, things of that nature. But the bottom line is, if you're not methylating properly, then you're going to build up homocysteine, which is an endogenous toxin. And so now when you look at homocysteine, directly linked to Alzheimer's disease, as well as cardiovascular disease, right? And certain types of cancers. So it literally goes back to this defect that we have. You talked about epigenetics, which ultimately we started looking at in the late 70s, early 80s. It was check it out. There's these little defects. We know that the body needs certain more, amounts of certain nutrients to prevent these full-blown gene effects. As we were told, it's in your genes. That's why you got this. It's in your genes, but ultimately you didn't have the right nutrients for your gene profile. So when I was a kid, I knew when I got sick, if I went and laid in the sun, I felt bad. What I didn't know is I had a defect on my vitamin D receptor genes, right? I just knew my body needed. I didn't know. I just knew it instinctively. And you got to remember, the research on vitamin D didn't hit until the 1990s.
Yeah.
So we look at vitamin D back in the day and it was it's good for bone metabolism. That was it. No one knew thyroid. No one knew the links to not only just bone metabolism, also immune system, sensitivity with the T cells, all these different things. Let's get back on track though. Let's go after the liver. Okay. By the way, it's interesting because remember, when it comes to vitamin D, it has to be converted.
Yeah.
It has to go through conversions, right? So if you're producing, somebody says, oh, I need my vitamin D. I go outside, get in the sunlight. Okay. But here's the deal. It does have a pro vitamin D factor, but the first conversion happens where? In the liver, the second one in the kidneys. So if the liver's not healthy, guess what? The body's not going to be healthy. So I'm going to paint you a picture and then we're going to talk about detoxification. I'm going to give you one last fun picture because I always like to bring in athletics into the moment, right? So back in the day, my buddies, I trained a lot of guys for athletic events and different things like that, a lot of bodybuilders and stuff like that. So we trained in a gym and I'll just paint the pictures, kind of dungy, iron everywhere, steel. Guys would have in their bags, they would go from station to station. They would have their bags. They had a gun and they had steroids in their bags. Okay. And so ultimately what would happen is, all these 99% of the guys in the gym were on steroids. I never took anabolic steroids because I wanted my health more than I wanted to be big. Right. And so ultimately what happened though, I walked in one day. It was probably more towards the evening, 9:00 at night. It's 100 degrees still outside, dust clouds from all talk and everything else that's going on. My brother's got 5 plates on each side, 525 pounds. He's squatting with, I don't know, ridiculous 520, whatever, 20 some odd reps. And he stands up, he turns around and goes, oh, there's Natural Boy. He says, hey, Starkie, if your liver doesn't quiver and your bladder doesn't splatter, then up the dosage because it doesn't really matter. And the whole gym breaks out and goes, all hail the steroid god, all hail the steroid god, right?
Oh my gosh.
Well, yeah, that's a great picture. And then all the time these guys were coming, they go, hey, my liver enzymes are up. I need help. I'm like going, yeah, you need help because you're using steroids all the time, you idiot. And the breakdown of hormones take place there. So let's talk about the breakdown when it comes to these particular liver moments. When you think about it, here's the deal. You have a couple different phases. You have what is known as a phase 1. You have a phase 2 liver detoxification. Some people break it down into different, going to keep it simple, phase 1, phase 2. So let's say, for instance, you take in some steroids, right? And you've got an extra amounts of hormones or whatever the case might be. The body has to take these things and go through a phase 1 liver detoxification. All right. So when it breaks that substance down, it has to remold it one more time to get into another phase, phase 2, and then the body can eliminate it. Well, here's the problem. As it's sitting there, it's easy to convert from phase 1, but then all of a sudden to get into phase 2, you've got to have antioxidants like glutathione in order for this to take place. If you don't have glutathione, guess what happens? You end up with a more toxic compound than you originally started. So the liver enzymes go up because the body's like, hey, we're trying to eliminate this. We're working hard down here, but we don't have the proper nutrients to be able to metabolize and get it through. So let's start.
So are the liver enzymes what is trying to convert that toxin from phase 1 to phase 2?
Exactly. From phase 1 to phase 2 and eventually be eliminated through the body. So ultimately what happens in this particular situation, in order to get these enzymes working properly, we need nutritional support. Okay. So let's talk about it. So let's just break this formula down just for fun. What's the first ingredient in this formula? It's selenium. Who in their right mind would put selenium in a formula like this, right? Okay, so the body has to have between that phase 1 and that phase 2, it's got to have those antioxidants, specifically glutathione. Another substance that is in here as well too is N-acetylcysteine, which N-acetylcysteine is the most effective substance you can use to increase glutathione. You can take glutathione until you're purple in the face. It doesn't quite. But what happens is the conversion from NAC into glutathione requires selenium. So that's why it's in there. It's heavy. It's good for heavy metal detoxification on its own, but it helps to create the glutathione. So now you can easily go from phase 1 to phase 2. The other thing that's nice in the phase 1 to phase 2, now we need these antioxidants like glutathione as well as vitamin C that helps. The other thing that becomes really cool is all these plant substances. For instance, milk thistle, dandelion, artichoke, all these things do a couple different things. And so let's go after milk thistle and dandelion, some of my favorite herbs. By the way, so when that situation happens and the liver's really working hard, what happens in that situation? The Chinese call it, for lack of better terms, liver heat. Mm-hmm. And by liver heat, you've got inflammation in the liver. And so what happens is milk thistle and dandelion are liver coolers. The reason why they're liver coolers because they help the liver detoxify and move its substances through so the body's not constantly recirculating them and have them going around. So it helps the body take it from the phase 1, go through the phase 2, and then go into the detox moment where it's eliminated. Now, how are fat-soluble substances eliminated? They're eliminated through, are you ready for this? Bile. So we sit down, we eat food, it's got fat, the body releases bile. What we don't know is there's a bunch of toxins in there. Okay,
yes.
So now the bile goes in. The body loves its bile, by the way. Okay. So what it does is it reabsorbs all its bile back up, about 90 some odd % of it, leaves about 10% behind, unless you're doing a couple of unique things. Number one, your bacterial biome is efficient down in the gastrointestinal tract, and you've got some type of fibers in it. So for instance, when you start looking at this, and all of a sudden we've got chicory root fiber, guess what that's all about? That helps the liver bile down in the gut to be able to cleanse those toxins and eliminate it through the feces. Okay? Crazy. And I don't know. Hopefully I'm holding you tight.
No, you are. And I think so many things are coming through my brain right now because I'm doing all this digging with the microbiome and understanding the benefits of fiber. And I've had these conversations recently and I haven't dove in too much, but it makes what you're talking about and the research I'm listening to pulls me back to this fad right now of the carnivore diet. Right. And I've had a few people bring it up and I haven't done enough digging. And, you could see these examples of some people who are thriving. But when you see the research of the lack of fiber and how important and crucial fiber is to the microbiome and even to what you're saying about even the liver processes when you do not have the fiber. So I'm just curious. Again, I haven't done enough research on the carnivore diet, but I think out of all the I mean, I'm a zero to hero kind of girl. Like I've had to work to find the gray area, not go all or nothing. But one thing I've always found, if I am drastically removing, deleting, eliminating a micro or macronutrient in the diet, like that's not balanced for the body. That's not what the body wants. You want, I mean, God created all these different things for us to be able to have. So I'm kind of curious on your thoughts. And I know this is going to be a slight tangent on the carnivore diet and this lack of fiber and how that's affecting and implicating the liver. Because I think like a vegan diet and like all these other keto, intermittent fasting, people feel great in the moment. But it's not till months later, maybe even a year later, where everything starts to go to shambles. And I mean, I experienced that when I was vegan for 3 years and I was doing all these things because it's the first time you've like removed. I mean, if you're carnivore, you're removing refined flours, you're removing sugars, you're thriving for a bit.
Right.
I know I've talked a lot, but I'm so curious on your thoughts on this.
Yeah. So, all right. So first of all, let me just throw out this. I mean, I'm going to throw some old school stuff out, some new school, some current research, stuff like that, all in like within seconds. All right. So there was a book that was written years ago. It's called Not by Bread Alone. And what this guy did is he actually went to the Inuit Indians that were up in the Alaskan territories who basically lived off of whale blubber, sea, as well as seaweed. Okay. Seaweed, as well as berries that they would bury in the ground, in the frozen ground. So they had berries throughout the year. Okay. So what we have a tendency to do is we want to like focus in and go, oh, they did carnivore, right? So everyone just, so here's the deal. Ultimately, they did live on meat in different societies or different things for different periods of times, and different people thrived and some people didn't thrive. Probably the best book on it is called, so it's by the Pottinger Price Institution. It's called Nutritional Degeneration. What this guy did in the 1930s and 1940s is he traveled around the world trying to find healthy people before refined foods entered into the system. Went into various areas, went to Switzerland where they lived on like butter, oatmeal, different types of lamb, different things of that nature, chicken, eggs, stuff like that. And ultimately they lived very healthily for hundreds of years. Then he went, studied the Indians up in Alaska, which was known back in those days as the Northern Territory, because it wasn't Alaska yet. All right. It wasn't a state. So then he went to Hawaii, stayed there, Polynesia, went to the outback in Australia. In different diets in different areas, people learned how to survive. Okay. As you said, though, what happens in the United States, we have a melting pot, so to speak, of all this DNA, and we were constantly looking for the perfect diet. Oh, I'll do this. And you're right, it does. I did the vegetarian thing. I also did the carnivore thing. I've done all of it. And ultimately what I found out for me is that certain things didn't work. I'm more of a mixed type. My body needs some carbs. It needs fibers. It does need proteins and probably a little bit more in abundance because of the weightlifting and other things that I do. But ultimately what happens is probably 70% of us are in that mixed style. But the problem is in there is you can eat all the junk food. That's the problem, because your body kind of feels, I feel okay with it. But the added responsibility of eating those junk foods eventually adds up. So the best book ever written on diet, you ready for this? Okay. Metabolic Typing by William Wilcott. He literally takes 100 years of people's research and puts it into a book, helps you take a test so you can actually understand what works best for you.
Metabolic typing?
William Wilcott. So what you do is you find out what's there. You go through and ultimately find out what works best for your DNA and your body, not trying to fit somebody else's diet into your scene and whatever's vogue for the time. And I did keto. I've done this. I've done keto probably 5 times in my life. But typically it was like to get ready for a bodybuilding show or something like that. Right? It's
a seasonal type of diet. I mean, I know that there's individuals who are doing it for, like epilepsy, like more, serious conditions. But yeah, I think any of these drastic diets,
it does get
what was that?
All the sugar out. So guess what? Improvement comes. And sometimes a high fat diet has great benefits for some individuals.
Yeah. And certain things are going to improve, but then you're also going to see, I mean, when I did a diet hyper focus on my blood sugar improves, but then what does my gut and my digestive health look like? Cause I'm pulling back all these carbohydrates and fibers. So I think finding that sweet spot for you. And I think, there is a little bit into the N=1 and experimenting and seeing what works for you. And I think ultimately being open and aware that things might pivot instead of like putting yourself in a box. I mean, I think I love putting myself in a box. It kind of makes life a little bit easier. Of like, you don't have to think about all these external things. But okay, so kind of
back. The fact of the matter is that most of us get challenges with our liver. And our digestive system, it's huge. If you're doing the keto diet, if you're doing, the carnivore diet, by the way, I heard about the rabbit diet, just eat rabbit, I've heard it all.
Okay,
so it's all out there. It's all fun. It's all cool and stuff like that. Bottom line is when you really kind of look at it, usually there's a balance. There's seasonal balance when it comes to, like different types of foods, We have a tendency to be mono thinking, like I eat an apple every day because there's an apple at the grocery store. Well, what about it's just a fall fruit, or different things like that. So those are the things. Forget the balance that is in nature as well too, right?
Yeah. So we've gone through a few of these herbs. Are there any other ingredients in here that you're like, I completely understand? I mean, we've talked about N-acetylcysteine being that precursor to creating the glutathione,
right.
Milk thistle, resveratrol, artichoke, turmeric. Can you explain?
Let's kind of break this down a little bit. I think, when you look at the formula, the dominance has been put on the milk thistle and the artichoke, the milk thistle and the dandelion. So those are really great liver supports, as well as they facilitate phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification very efficiently. And they do a great job doing it. Okay. So dandelion is a great cooler. When you look at some of the milk thistle studies, liver rejuvenation really probably pokes up a little bit. So then the other thing to remember is too, is now we need to move the bile because that's where the toxins are housed. So we start doing artichoke, and ultimately what happens with the artichoke was we actually start moving the bile, and the bile is actually able to be eliminated and moved through the system. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Can we explain a little bit for our listeners what bile is, why it's needed, and where it's stored? Because I think where it's stored can play into a whole other conversation.
Yeah. So when we think of the liver, and we have the gallbladder, and the gallbladder is where the bile is produced. As we were saying, a lot of these toxins are moved. The fat soluble toxins are moved into the bile. And then bile is released every time we digest fats and every time we digest a meal. And so what it does is it micellizes or breaks down fats into tiny little compounds. So think about this. Think about like an oil and vinegar combination, right? So what happens, oil, vinegar, and water, and they all separate out. And then you get ranch dressing, which is the same thing, but they did something. They added either an egg yolk or they added soy lecithin, which is an emulsifier. So it took the fats and the water-soluble compounds and it blended them into a nice creamy substance. Well, that's exactly what bile does with the fats and the foods that you eat. So now the body can absorb the fats and draw in those nutrients that it needs. Otherwise, those fats are just globs that just move through the system. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of you mentioned where it's produced. There's a lot of individuals who've had their gallbladder removed.
Right.
And chances are their doctors, low fat, no fat. They struggle breaking down fats. And we know, with all this research, how important fats are in the diet. What do these individuals do? Is bile going to be something that's going to be helpful? Is purity of liver support going to be something that they should absolutely be on? What does that look like?
Yeah. So here's usually what we find with a lot of the customers that come in that have a gallbladder removed. Ultimately, what happens, number one, is this. It seems like at first the body has a tendency to flow bile more freely because there's no tank to hold it. That's the gallbladder. And so every eat a meal, ultimately there's a chemical message that gets sent to the gallbladder to squeeze it and to release some bile, right? So now what happens is just a straight tube that goes down where it kind of drip veins, for lack of better terms. It just drips as needed. There's a little bit of liver action, and it seems like as 2 or 3 years go by, somewhat stables out. There used to be a lot of doctors that would say, don't eat fats, don't do this. Now the doctors just tell you, just do your day. Just do what you got to do, right? Okay. And that's what we hear. I'm not saying that every doctor says that, but that's what we're hearing usually when people come in. So ultimately what happens with them is oftentimes they're not digesting their fats efficiently. So that kind of brings me back to digestivity. Have any type of digestive disorders or food sensitivities, thank you very much. I've got 2 hands up for food sensitivities. I call it the pregnancy test. I eat a food. I wake up at 2 a.m. My stomach sticks out like I'm pregnant. I'm like, okay, that food didn't work, right? So that's always my barometer. It goes, hey, why don't you take a food sensitivity test? I'm so old, I know what I'm sensitive to now, right? I eat that, that's no. I eat that, that's good, right? So I know not only my metabolic type, but ultimately what happens is this. Still having a bacteria balance becomes critical. One of the things we also talked about is all these different foods. We've been talking about junk foods and good foods and all these crazy diets. It challenges and it changes the microbiome. You go on a meat diet, it's going to change your microbiome. I'm telling you right now. You go on a vegan diet, it's going to change it. I'm not telling you it's going to be positive or negative one way or the other. I'm just going to tell you it's going to change it. Okay. So what happens is if you look at societies for years, they always had some type of ingestible, different types of bacteria that flourish the microbiome, as well as eating different types of fruits and vegetables, which brought soil microbiomes in as well too. We don't have a tendency to do that nowadays. So when you look at digestivity, a couple different things. Number one, it's going to help break down all different types of starches and carbs, proteins, and also nourish the microbiome. So ultimately that becomes a great complex, so to speak. If you're wanting to detox, by the way, let's talk about symptoms of needs of detox. Sluggishness, lack of energy. You eat food, you're always bloated, you're not digesting well. Another great reason for wanting to use something like Purity would be also let's say you've, gone rounds of antibiotics or different things of that nature, and you just need to support the body's liver system detoxification. Another thing is you're waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning. Mm-hmm. That's when the liver's doing its thing. And if it's having to work hard, guess what? You're waking up at 2 or 3 and go, why am I waking up at 2 or 3? Because your liver needs to be worked. Okay. So these are some of the reasons why you want to have this working. So that's one of the things about the Purity that becomes critical. Now, let's say you do that. You might want to do liver detox 2-3 times a year, but you want to make sure that you don't have that buildup anymore. A properly functioning digestive system makes a huge difference. And so when you look at digestivity, that's one of the things that's so great about it. It's going to help with the food sensitivities. It's also going to help with the microbiome and also help you. Now, when you look at that formula, there's some herbs in there that do support the liver, and they also help with not only detox and elimination, but it's a lot milder moment as opposed to a little bit more aggressive with the Purity.
Some of the ingredients, the gluten relief formula, digestive enzymes that you mentioned, that's going to be so important. Bromelain, papain, chamomile. I love chamomile to help kind of switch us from that sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system. Because a lot of times, I got a 1-year-old, so I'm eating standing up while doing this and we're just multitasking on multitasking. And the best thing you could do for your digestive system is monotask, but I'm not in a season of life where I can really do that right now. What was that?
I've never monotasked.
Yeah. I think it's built into my ADD, just go, type A personality. And, I think there's benefits to that, but then there's some other stuff. And so the chamomile is going to help put us in that rest digest mode, which is helpful. And like you said, there's some the beet, fennel, ginger, nettle, those prebiotics to nourish that gut microbiome.
Beets are very effective for helping bile move. Okay. So is ginger, by the way.
Yeah.
It's great to contract the bile, and it helps to contract the gallbladder and make it move. So that is excellent because it's not only going to help with liver health and liver detoxification, but it's also going to help increase the absorption of nutrients as well too. Great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In regards to probiotics, I'm curious. So we have, and I know that there's different controversy of strains and amounts, and we have a mix in here. Are there any probiotics in here that stand out to you that, that are doing specific things in the gut? We obviously have Saccharomyces boulardii, lactobacillus, a range of those, but we're getting that blend of probiotics, of digestive enzymes. And the nice thing too is this is shelf stable, so it's really easy to travel with.
Well, the other thing is you got some bifidus in there as well too. So ultimately when you look, there's the heavy hitters, the lactobacillus and the bifidus, and the boulardii does a great job as well, by the way, for 2 things. Number one, it's going to help not only with digestive, it's also going to help to eliminate fungal bacteria and things of that nature. So that's a huge one. Okay. So for me, the biggest, and I was thinking about this whole acidophilus thing the other day. The first time I ever sold a bottle of acidophilus was one of my buddies that was in high school, and he used it for acne. That was the stupidest thing I ever heard in my life. Came rolling in. Got to remember, this is 1979. if I sold, like, I don't know, we used to sell some liquid probiotics. We did a little bit of that. If I sold more than 6 bottles of probiotics in a week, it was a miracle, right? People tuned into it, right? And so, and literally yogurt on the shelf was like, that was rare, right? And so ultimately what we know is this is the heavy hitters of lactobacillus, those things that do such a phenomenal job in the small intestine. And also once you get to the large intestine, the bifidobacteria as well as, the lungs, the different types of bifidobacteria that are there. So ultimately for me is having those families of bacteria, which you're kind of trying to simulate, to be honest with you, lack of better terms, is like a kefir and or a yogurt. You're bringing those nutrients or those bacteria that would naturally be inherent in there. So what's going on in the world of that, though, is if you can take certain strains and you can actually tweak it and make it your own, then you can, and do research on it, then what happens is you've got something that you can have as like a talking point. For instance, like there's different bacteria that they're doing research when it comes to athletes and prevention of upper respiratory tract infections. So we know that people that actually use kefir strains, which is very common, that is going to be in, guess what? What is it?
Go.
Right. So there's like this research now on different types of kefir strains that prevent upper respiratory tract infections for for endurance athletes that, compete in longevity or long-term events, like, 50 miles and all these. Yeah. So when they get sick, obviously there's no VO2 max because you can't get air in, all these other different things like that. So it's like, oh, you got to use the lactobacillus, got to use this, but it's inherent to what is in the kefir. And this research moment's kind of fun because we're actually starting to see, there's performance actually aspects to it. So what people are doing there is they're coining certain bacteria with research behind it, and then they're actually making some claims and having talking points for them.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think in any industry, and now that I'm in the marketing field, you see how many, like, you just slap a certain word on something or, and that's why it's so important to just do that deeper digging and that research to see, the science behind it of what it's actually happening, or just try it out for yourself and see if you notice the needle, move.
Yeah, and it's absolutely legitimate. I think the biggest thing when it comes to probiotics and digestive enzymes is your gut feels better. So when your gut feels better, lack of inflammation. The other thing that happens there as well too is serotonin's produced. You're happier, you're more relaxed. Things are working a lot better.
Absolutely. Well, this was fantastic. I feel like we left, we put out this foundation of liver health, the importance of it, did a little bit of a deep dive into these formulas. Any lasting, inputs on digestive health, gut health, things that you might recommend, and just to leave our listeners with?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing here too is, not forgetting the food foundation. Find the foods that work for you. Make sure that you're, in a situation where you're eating ample amounts of good foods. The bad foods ultimately cause, bacteria imbalances. I mean, let's face it, we're all going to live in different worlds. I like to live in what I call like either an 80-20 or a 90-10. 80% of the time I'm doing the best I can. The other 20% I'm not sweating it, or a 90-10. Sometimes I'm on 90-10 for the whole summer. It seems like I do that because I like to get in shape and look the best, right? And so I want my stomach feeling well. So then Christmas comes and you're like 70-20 or 70-30, right? So ultimately, I think eating the right types of foods makes a big difference. The most unrefined fruits, vegetables, things of that nature. If you're doing carnivore, make sure you're getting the best meat you can get your hands on. I mean, ultimately, still, there's probably some food fibers that need to slip in. I would say vegetables. Anytime I ever did, I add vegetables in because it seemed to make everything digest better. So the right combination of foods make a huge difference. Probiotics, if you're not eating probiotics, you need to take probiotics because if you're not, it's going to make a world of difference with your digestive health from head to toe, prevention of disease, all these other different things. I'm telling you, probiotics are monumental. I mean, back in the days when I sold 6 bottles, I probably sell 6 bottles a minute now. People know on how they feel. And I would challenge you, if you're not trying a probiotic, try the Inner Eco, do the digestivity, do the Boulardi, whatever you want to do. Those things I would recommend challenging yourself as quick as possible, especially if you're not sleeping right, things of that nature. Ultimately, when the herbalists look at it, when it comes to like depression or frustration or just, not having a full life, it's digestion and adrenals. And that's another topic for another day.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to explore that with you. Adrenals is like my baby. I love talking about it. One, because I've gone through the ringer with that. So I think that is a really important topic to discuss. Well, thank you so much for being here, Starkie. Where can people find more about yourself, Clark's, kind of the information that you provide?
Kind of crazy. You want to find out about me, it's Starkie, Starkie, and then Sowers. Just have fun, jump on the net. You can poke around. There's enough stuff I've done. It's all out there. Clark's is foundational. We've been in business since 1972, although the business of Clark's Nutrition bought out in a pre-existing health food store that dates back to 1929. So the family is insane. It's been a pleasure to work with the family for now 4 generations of going on. The 4th generation is now taken over. So that's been exciting. I think we've helped in so many different areas when it comes to different things, such as passing the DeShay bill and working with your owner, Darren, for multiple projects as well, too. Love that man. Love the foundation of, LifeSeasons. It's a pleasure to sell the products too, and makes us happy every time we do at Clark's.
Oh, that's incredible. We love you so much, Starkie, and we're so grateful for your support and your knowledge and all the insights that you provide. So we'll definitely have to have you back on an adrenal conversation. But
that's great.
Perfect. All right. Take care.
All right. Thanks for having me.